Marilyn, Dr. Harris, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Administrator Criswell, for being here, and thanks for your service in the past. I'm going to ask about the Shelter and Services Program, which is administered by FEMA in partnership with CBP. So my first question is it funded through FEMA or through CBP or through both or what?
The funding is appropriated to CBP, and then they pass it through to FEMA.
Oh, so the entire amount is passed through?
Yes.
Okay, so a little federal shell game here. Okay, because it says in your statement that FEMA's mission is to help people before, during, and after disasters. So do you consider the southern border a disaster?
I am not an immigration expert, Congressman. My role in this is to administer the SSP program as directed by Congress to support jurisdictions that are experiencing costs to support this.
Right, so you didn't answer my question. Do you consider the southern border to be a disaster? Because otherwise it would be inconsistent with FEMA's mission, because your mission says you're supposed to deal with disasters.
FEMA's mission is to help people before, during, and after disasters, but we also have a great level of technical capability to provide assistance and technical assistance to solve many different problems that are out
but
there.
that exists in the entire government. I mean, believe me, grants are administered in the entire government. Your agency is the only one that administers local grants. So I'm just curious to what rocket scientist made the decision to actually put a border issue into FEMA, because my people, I represent the low-lying Eastern Shore of Maryland. I want to thank you, by the way, for the work you're doing with Crisfield on resiliency. They think of disasters as something that's not man-made. I think most people would agree that the southern border disaster is a man-made disaster, made by the person in the White House, a mile down Pennsylvania Avenue here. And I think it dilutes FEMA. Because when I go and my people tell me, well, I want to get, you should get money to FEMA. I go, why? So they can help people cross the border illegally? This is a sizable chunk of money, because if I'm reading it correctly, it not only announces $300 million in direct funding to communities. Now, which is the largest recipient of that $300 million? Which community?
I'll have to get that data for you.
You don't know about $300 million that was released last week by your administration?
I just don't have the breakdown in front of me.
Well, which are the three largest communities? Which were the ones that were the big guys in this?
Certainly there are
Was it New York? Was New York one of them?
New York perhaps was one of them. Again, I don't have the breakdown.
And did you come from New York?
I spent 2 years in
You
New
did.
York.
So you actually were employed by New York City, and New York is now one of the largest recipients of a grant that I would suggest that some members think makes our borders less secure than more secure. Okay, might be a coincidence, but if you can get that information to me, I'd appreciate that, because I'd like to know where my constituents would like to know where those $300 million are going. Now, there's also $340 million in what's called $340 million to the Shelter and Services Program, competitive grant programs, to be allocated for the end of this fiscal year. So is that going to NGOs?
So the SSP program, FEMA administers as directed by Congress to provide funding to support communities and nonprofit organizations that are experiencing costs to support migration. It has always been intended that when Congress directed it to be changed to SSP.
I'm talking about the grant program, because I'm assuming that the $300 million that goes to communities is different from the $340 million. That's what your press release. I mean, this is your press release.
No, yes.
So I'm asking specifically about the grant program.
The grant program was always intended to be a competitive grant program when it turned from ESFP-H to the SSP program. However, with the late appropriation, we had determined we needed to do a direct allocation to get money into the hands of organizations that were experiencing costs. While we stood up the competitive program, it will be a competitive program going forward. Any jurisdiction would be eligible that has costs that they are.
And when you mean organizations, you mean jurisdictions?
It can be a city, it can be a nonprofit organization.
Okay, so if you get the information on who are the largest recipients, I'd appreciate that. Now, my real concern is in the last line of this press release, because this is characteristic across the administration. You're aware that we have limitation amendments in all the appropriations bills that prohibit lobbying Congress. Is that right? So your line that says DHS continues to call on Congress to pass the bipartisan border security agreement, you don't consider that lobbying? Putting that in a press release? I mean, this is a press release from your agency, right? Mm-hmm. You're aware of the limitation amendment. It says you are not to lobby Congress, to spend taxpayer dollars to lobby Congress, and it says DHS continues to call on Congress. Now, I don't know, call on sounds like a synonym for lobbying. I don't know, maybe not. To pass the bipartisan border security agreement. Is it your opinion that is not lobbying?
It is my opinion that is not lobbying.
And why is it your opinion that that calling on Congress to do something is not lobbying?
Sir,
I'm a member of Congress and I'm reading this.
Yeah.
How is that not lobbying me?
Sir, we call on you to pass the budget at the same time, right? These are acts that we know will make a difference in supporting these communities, your jurisdictions, your communities.
Believe me, on this side of the dais, we fully understand what lobbying is. We fully understand what this administration is attempting to do. We fully understand that the border is a disaster, but it's a man-made disaster. And honestly, I think this administration is skirting the lobbying restriction, and I hope the next administration takes people like yourself who are lobbying Congress actively through their communications office and actually prosecutes them under the Deficiency Act. I yield back.
Any follow-ups, Mr. Cuellar?
A couple things.